We are a country of laws, and our oath that we swear is to support the Constitution of the United States and the laws of our country. And so as we engage in this process, what is important is the meaning of the Constitution, the facts before us, and that interpretation. And there can be no other consideration.
Hey again, everyone. It is 5 o'clock in New York. I'm Alicia Menendez, in for Nicolle Wallace. When Maine's Secretary of State made the decision last week that Trump's role in the January 6th disqualified him from running for office again, she was very clear. This was about what the Constitution said. This was a matter of facts and of the law. In just the last few minutes, Trump appealed that decision to the state Superior Court, saying that, quote, the secretary's ruling was the product of a process infected by bias and pervasive lack of due process, is arbitrary, capricious, and characterized by abuse of discretion. Critics of the secretary's decision, as well as the ruling by Colorado's state Supreme Court, which came to the same conclusion 9 days earlier, say that it should be up to the voters to decide if Trump is worthy of a second term in office. But to that point, former constitutional law professor Congressman Jamie Raskin says that the rulings in Maine and in Colorado are not undemocratic at all. In fact, quite the opposite.
We have a number of disqualifications in the Constitution for serving as president. For example, age. I mean, you know, I've got a colleague who's a great young politician, Maxwell Frost. He's 26. He can't run for president. Now, would we say that that's undemocratic? Well, that's the rules of the Constitution. If you don't like the rules of the Constitution, change the Constitution. If you think about it, of all the forms of disqualification we have, the one that disqualifies people for engaging in insurrection is the most democratic, because it's the one where people choose themselves to be disqualified. In terms of your age or where you were born, that's not up to you. But you know, Donald Trump is in that tiny, tiny number of people who've essentially disqualified themselves.
As different states have interpreted Section 3 and Trump's actions in different ways, we've seen a patchwork build across the country with different rulings, putting more and more pressure on the Supreme Court to ultimately decide Trump's eligibility. Meanwhile, in the ongoing quest to interpret Section 3, ABC News has taken a look into what the authors of the amendment truly meant by looking at their own words. They viewed transcripts of the Senate floor debate in 1866 when Section 3 was being passed. The clause was originally written after the Civil War to bar those from the Confederacy from voting. Senator Jacob Howard of Michigan wanted to expand it and stop former Confederates from serving in government altogether. And Senator Peter Van Winkle of West Virginia argued that this should look beyond the Civil War. Quote, this is to go into our Constitution and to stand to govern future insurrection as well as the present. And I should like to have that point definitely understood. So now, in this new year, in this presidential year where the stakes for our democracy are at a critical inflection point, we wait to hear what the Supreme Court of the United States will decide. And that is where we start this hour with former U.S. Attorney, author of the forthcoming book, Attack from Within, How Disinformation is Sabotaging America, and co-host of the #Sisters-in-Law podcast, Barbara McQuade. Plus, Princeton University professor and distinguished political scholar, Glaude, and senior opinion columnist for the Boston Globe, and another co-host of the #Sisters-in-Law podcast, Kimberly Atkins Stohr. Barbara, before we dive into these big themes, I want to talk timing. Last week, we saw an appeal by the Colorado Republican Party, which put into effect the stay that the state Supreme Court had laid out. Trump just appealed the Maine ruling a few minutes ago. Talk about what happens next and what are those next deadlines that we're watching out for?
Well, the Supreme Court is going to have to review this petition and decide whether they want to take the case up. They could decline to take it up and say, you know, states, you're on your own. I think that is highly unlikely. Instead, I think they will take it up, and I think they have to take it up quickly. We're going to see the Iowa caucuses as soon as January 15th. Now, one of the things that they can do is to issue an administrative stay to sort of preserve the status quo and allow Trump to stay on these ballots until they sort it out. But I think time is of the essence here, and I think they need to decide it at least within the next month or so.
Well, to your point about time being of the essence, in just the last hour, Colorado's Secretary of State responded to the Republican Party's appeal, saying she too believes the court should act quickly. And here's what she wrote. As the above calendar demonstrates, expedited resolution of this case will ensure that Colorado voters cast ballots in the presidential primary election knowing whether Trump is qualified to serve as president. Providing this certainty is important both for the candidates in Colorado's Republican primary and, most importantly, for the millions of Republican and unaffiliated voters in Colorado who will be casting ballots in that election. The urgency, it is palpable, Barb.